Okay. All right. So welcome, team. Good morning. It's nice to see all of you. Chelsea, if you're listening to the recording, we're sorry to miss you today, but hope that you have the opportunity to listen to our session later when your life allows. So is everybody able to join me on the meeting design? I see Joanne, and I see an anonymous kangaroo and an anonymous ferret now. If you're able to join me on the meeting design like we've been doing for the last few sessions when we're on Zoom, we're going to use the online version of the meeting design to guide us through our time together. So with that,
find that.
It's in the email, Jason, that I sent to the team with pre-work on, and I sent that late Thursday of last week, if that helps you find it in your email, or I can, let me make it much easier than that. Here, I'll put it in the chat box. It's in our Zoom chat if you want to grab it from there. Okay, so why don't we start with our check-in prompt this morning. 2 prompts. Number 1, how are you arriving? And number 2, now that you have growing skills in leading complex change, what's a hope you have for engaging stakeholders in support of the changes you seek? Who would like to start?
I'll start. So I am arriving rested. Yesterday I wasn't feeling very good. Had drill this weekend, and each day started at 4 in the morning. So it was a little exhausting this weekend. We had a long drill. We had Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So I think it just kind of beat me down, and so I wasn't feeling good yesterday, but feeling better today. And as far as I think reading through the pre-work, I'm excited to look at the different aspects of the different types of stakeholders. It's not something that I had, I think, consciously thought about. You know, like as I was reading through it, I could think in my mind of examples of different types of stakeholders that I work with. But just learning more skills in engaging them better. So
awesome. Thanks, Sam. Yeah, I'm confident that you intuitively think about stakeholders, particularly with your military background. There's probably a particular kind of stakeholder that you know how to think about well.
Oh yeah.
I'm excited for us to to spend a little more time on that. Welcome. Glad you're here and feeling rested.
Thank you.
Valerie or Jason, how about you?
I am arriving better than I arrived to my meeting with Valerie a half hour ago. I'm usually in person, but today, no. I'm probably like a middle of the night person. But I'm, you know, she told me that that you're excited about this topic.
Yeah.
Glad to hear that. So I'm sure there's going to be some good energy during today's meeting. And my hope is you kind of, I looked over the information that you gave us from last week, and I can tell you that I never would have thought that much about stakeholders. So I am looking forward to hopefully digesting a lot of this information and being able to better identify stakeholders and how to, you know, how to handle each one of them.
Great. Thanks, Jason. I am excited about this topic. It's one of my, in a geeky way, it is one of my favorite things to do is identify and organize stakeholders. So welcome. I'm glad you're here. Valerie.
Yeah, so I'm arriving I'm feeling good, feeling energized. I was sharing with Jason because I don't think he was at the meeting when we kind of talked through this program with you, and I was telling him that even just in the meeting talking about this topic, you like kind of started out, and I was like, if Shannon's that excited, it's gonna be great. So I'm excited. But you know, definitely also have a part of my brain with Chelsea. So just kind of thinking about her and you know, wishing for the best for her and her family. And I think for me, you know, DOP is a regulatory entity, right? We enforce laws that come under our authority. So it's really easy, I think, for us to get into the bad habit of just sort of saying, because you have to, because we said so, right? Because we can, but it's not the most effective way. So I think this will be a really good opportunity to think about how we can bring stakeholders along and get them involved and more buying in more to the things that we're doing, even though we can just sort of force it upon people. I'm excited to think about a better way to do that. So.
Awesome. That's great, Valerie. Yeah. Yeah, there's a whole, I mean, what part of our conversation is really about how do we enroll them, right? And the act of enrolling is so much different than the act of forcing. So awesome. I'm glad that you're already beginning to think about that shift. Welcome. Thanks. Joanne.
Hi, everybody. It's so good to see you. It was so fun to meet you all last time. I'm arriving, my heart is a little bit heavy with the wounds of the world. Being in Atlanta, Georgia, we witness this every day. And so I am arriving wanting to do something about that. And today is election day for us. And so I'm going to exercise my democratic right and going to go to the polls today. And so that feels at least like the one thing that I am going to do. But yeah, I'm just so delighted to be here with you all. And Shannon is just a consummate maestro on stakeholders. So it's anytime I can sit with her and hear her talk about stakeholders, I love it too. So I'm complete.
Thanks, Joanne. I'm glad you're here. I'm arriving very rested, and I would say also just mindful. Chelsea's email, or your email, Valerie, about Chelsea this morning is the second kind of change in life that somebody in my broader network has experienced, like in the last 24 hours. And so it's just a reminder that the time we have is precious and we should make the most of it in whatever way that is for each of us. And now I'm feeling kind of pressure that today be really good about stakeholders after all you guys have checked in. So my hope is that we meet your expectations. My other hope is that I do find this way of thinking about identifying and organizing stakeholders to be incredibly impactful, and it is scalable. So my real hope is that you find just the nuggets that will be most valuable for you in each of your daily work, because it may or may, it's likely not going to be everything that we talk about today, but there will be pieces of it that I think if you can grab onto those, it has a way of impacting the way that you work. So that is my hope. So welcome to all of us. Let us move to our 8:40 slot and review today's plan. So could I ask for somebody to read the context for today's workshop, please?
I'll do that. Context for today's Solve workshop. During this
and that, sorry, Jason, that should say involve. That's a typo on my part.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
During this program, we've learned how to plan, design, and facilitate powerful and productive meetings and how to scope complex problems and change. Today, we'll learn an approach to identify and involve the diverse and relevant stakeholders we'll need to engage in creating the change we seek. This skill of thoughtfully involving others is foundational to creating strategic and sustainable outcomes.
Awesome. How about our intent and our intended outcomes?
I can read those.
Thanks.
So intent for today: to expand our skills to identify and involve relevant stakeholders in order to create more strategic and sustainable change. And our intended outcomes: at the end of today's session, we will have 1, increased understanding of who are relevant stakeholders and why we should care, how and why traditional approaches often fail to sufficiently involve stakeholders, how stakeholders impact and enhance any problem-solving effort or change initiative. 2, an experience in identifying stakeholders in a real-world problem. 3, increased understanding around how to better engage stakeholders. 4, increased understanding around how to organize stakeholders. 5, an an experiential introduction to the 4 ways stakeholders can be organized. 6, increased belief in your own growing ability to address complex problems and the stakeholders involved. And 7, continued leadership team connection and trust.
Awesome, thanks. And I will walk us through how we're going to spend our time. So at 8:45, in just a minute or so, we're going to transition into, and this may not take 15 minutes, and if it doesn't, that's great. But we spent some time updating the scope that we worked on as a team in your working session. So Valerie's going to walk us through the work that happened there. Then we're going to move into our first conversation on stakeholders, which Joanne will lead around identifying stakeholders for about 30 minutes. Then at 9:30, we're going to transition to our first fishbowl activity, where Joanne's going to facilitate some work that I've done around identifying stakeholders for an initiative that I'm leading. Then we'll take a break at 9:45 for 5 minutes. Then when we come back, you guys are going to spend about 45 minutes practicing identifying stakeholders, and we're going to use the real world problem of the Medicaid that's in the Medicaid scope for you to begin to do this. When we come back from that, we'll take a break for 10 minutes. Then we'll come back and begin to talk about engaging stakeholders for 10 minutes. Then we'll look at how we organize stakeholders for about 15 minutes. We'll do a second fishbowl around organizing stakeholders for 10 minutes. And then at 11:20, we'll transition into a topic called visualizing the network, which is building a stakeholder network. And Joanne is going to lead a demo on her whiteboard behind her, where we're going to actually build a stakeholder network for the fishbowl project that I'm working on. We'll have an opportunity at 11:40 to talk about next steps. I want to make sure that we, as a team, figure out the best way to use the working session that follows this particular this session. And then at 11:50, we will check out, adjourning promptly, I think, at 11:55. Any thoughts or questions about how we're going to spend our time? Bye, Rhodes. Love you. Okay, awesome. So with that, let's go. If you're in the meeting design, at our 8:45 slot, we have a 3-step process. The first is that Valerie's going to walk us through the work on polishing the scope. We'll see if there are questions, Jason, from you, or Sam from you, or Joanne, if you have any, as you look at this particular scope. And then I'm going to say just maybe like 3 sentences to connect the dots to stakeholders before I hand it over to Joanne. So let's go ahead and hop onto the Medicaid scope. So just to remind everybody, this is the scope that you did as a team in our working session. And I took the opportunity to clean up the situation section, and then Valerie and Chelsea and I got together and we finished the intended outcomes. So Valerie, why don't you walk us through what would you like to share with the team based on the work that we did?
So it was good. We got together with Shannon and sort of agreed that we felt pretty comfortable with the situation, because Chelsea and I have lived it enough that it felt pretty clear in our minds, for better or worse. So we really focused on the intended outcomes. And so we took the intended outcomes that we started with and kind of just, it was going back to them after the fact to look through them again and say, okay, are we missing anything? Like, is there, and it felt like there was sort of a couple that we could clean up maybe, and then that there was something missing. And so I think what we added, and I forget, I know there were a couple changes we made and I now can't remember exactly what they were, but okay. We added, I think it was the communication that we added to the list. So communication throughout stakeholders about our agreed upon approach, because we sort of, and maybe that was one that we already had in there, but that was sort of,
you and Chelsea added that in your
conversation. Did we add that one? Okay. So the thought was, we can do all of this effort and get leadership on board and do all of this, come up with a strategy and a timeline and all of this other stuff. But if it's not communicated to everybody throughout those 3 groups, then it's not going to be successful. So that was the piece that we added that felt like kind of the missing piece of the puzzle there. And then we also reordered them into what we felt like was an order that made sense, as far as, before we go anywhere on this, we have to make sure that we have leadership from all three groups kind of on board with the plan. We need to lay the foundation with some shared understanding of the objectives and challenges of the role that we can play, come up with a strategy, and then have the commitment and the communication throughout, and then ultimately hopefully build the trust. So it was helpful to kind of go through that and put it into what felt like a logical order, because then it starts to lend itself to developing a more solid plan. But we basically stopped at that point and didn't go into articulating the plan because we felt like we needed this piece, the stakeholder piece, in order to really articulate a plan, because this is not just a DOP effort. It's we definitely need to involve the other stakeholders. So
great. Yep. Awesome. Two things I will add. I think this second piece is really important because, at least up until this point, it's this team's perception of the situation that we're using to define the problem. And when we did the scope together, I thought you guys did a great job of thinking about what it would be like to be in the shoes of Medicaid and CAPS. And there's a little bit of your sense of their perspective in here, but we haven't actually fully integrated or had the opportunity to be curious and inquire about their perspective. So that second outcome of shared understanding of their objectives and challenges, I think will help to begin to round out. And it may even shift a little bit the intent and the outcomes, which is fine, because even though we teach this work as if it's linear, there are actually tools that can be deployed at any point in a change process, depending on where you are in your particular effort. The other thing, Valerie, and it's probably a small point for the team, but you added this word timelines because it felt like, from your perspective, that the strategies were helpful, but it's been timelines in the past that have created the missed expectations with the team.
Yes, it's all coming back to me now as you talk. And I think that second one, Shannon, that you mentioned, I think what we had come up with during our working session was something like shared understanding of like the value that DOP brings, something along those. It was a little more DOP. We changed that to focus on really all three. Sorry, bug. I just got attacked by a bug. But we changed it to focus on all three, to make sure we have a shared understanding in all directions. Yeah.
Awesome. Team, any thoughts or questions for Valerie or myself based on the work that Valerie and Chelsea did? Anything you see, Joanne, that you'd like to observe?
I think this is a really nice, I didn't see the raw, but this feels very like comprehensive and thoughtful in how you've executed it. I have one question and then one sort of follow-up. So is this team, this is real, I know that much. Is this team actually tasked to execute this? Is this like a thing you guys are actually supposed to be doing?
It's something that we want to do. So it is, I mean, when we sort of started when I started talking to Shannon about a couple of different real life examples that we could use for our working session, I called it the Medicaid problem. And I think anyone in our office who has worked with Medicaid on a project would know generally what the Medicaid problem, I mean, for as long as I've been with DOP, which is almost 6 years now, we've had a real struggle with working with this agency, or specifically with the Medicaid program within health and welfare. And there tend to be the largest, some of the highest risk contracts in the state. So when they're bad, they're real bad. So it wasn't like we didn't already have this on our task list as we need to solve this problem, but we all agreed that like, we really want to solve this problem.
Cool. So then my follow-up is, what is the degree to which Medicaid is willing to solve this problem with you at this point? Because this number 2 is huge. It's a big deal. Well, the 1 and 2 are a big deal. I'm just sort of curious, like, where this story is at this point.
So, I mean, we haven't talked to them about it so we haven't talked about it sort of in the, in this sense at all. We haven't brought it to them, but I think I think everyone knows there's a problem. And I think we've tried unsuccessfully to fix it for years. And so I don't know, but I think that Medicaid leadership at least will be on board with, we got to find a better way to do this because it's not working.
Okay,
It's hard for us, right? It is bad for us and it's bad for them. So I think there's buy-in.
Yeah, there's sufficient pain in the system to raise the probability that.
Yes.
That's it, because it's going to matter, right, when we talk about engaging stakeholders. And so I was just sort of curious, like, out of theory into practice, where we were.
I think the other thing that I hear when you describe that, Valerie, is that that sort of reiterates the value of going through the scope process and having this intended outcome sequence. Because if you get to number 1 and Medicaid and CAPS are like, we're happy, this isn't a problem, suck it up, DOP, you can be like, all right, like, not going to waste my time on 2 through 7, right?
Yeah.
If you want to, right? So it helps us to know where to start with our energy.
Yeah,
Definitely.
it's huge. Thanks, guys. No, it's really elegant work.
Sam, Jason, any thoughts or questions for Valerie?
No questions, but I think what we've got here is pretty incredible as far as laying the groundwork for that will end up being successful and build teamwork in the future. At least, down on paper, well thought out in words. And so, yeah, this is looking good.
Great. Thanks, Jason. And your audio, just so you know, just is a little, like, for me anyways, it's a little in and out. I don't know if I'm the only one. Sam, it's good for you?
It's doing the same thing here.
Okay. So you're a little in and out, Jason. I know we heard most of what you said, but just for your awareness as we keep talking. Okay. All right, Valerie, nice work. And Chelsea, when you're listening. Okay, a couple things. So just from a process perspective, if we think about the values that we talked about at the very beginning of this leadership development experience, one of them was that diversity and inclusion is essential to complex problem solving. And we have been involving others up until this point in terms of understanding the situation, getting clear, at least from our perspective, about the change that we seek, and what are the outcomes that we think are necessary for that. But to your point earlier, Valerie, before we move into really building a detailed plan or engaging others, we want to begin to be thinking about others more broadly and who are the stakeholders that are going to be essential for achieving complex change. So again, even though we teach we teach the elements as if they're linear, they're actually can be fluid, and they are fluid in real life. So at this point, we would stop and we would begin to think about stakeholders and how we might identify them and enroll them in this change effort. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Joanne, who's going to start our first piece of content on identifying stakeholders, and I will share my screen, Jason.
Do you want to do the overview on slide 2, or do we want to just go ahead and?
I think we can just
okay. All right. And
just go forward.
Go ahead and start with slide 3. So as Shannon said, we've been teaching this to you as sort of a linear process, but there is a whole there's a whole skill development arc that we've taken so far in getting us to this point. So we consider this kind of the last building block to change, although we're going to have a whole thing about trust, which actually brings the whole thing to full circle. But, just sort of recap, we've talked about how we elevate the functional unit for real-time working when we talked a lot about meetings, and we thought a lot about how to even articulate really powerful outcomes. So you're seeing that now being represented in scope. And so we take it out of that sort of temporally bound moment, and we release the time axis, and then we talk about how we can really scope the right problem to solve, and at least get a strategy down for what it actually looks like to solve it. And so like your Medicare problem is a beautiful example of that. And so now we get to involve all the other messy people that involves that are going to be critical for us to be successful. And this is the most complicated piece to date, and we needed everything that we've learned up until now to get us to this point, because as Valerie was saying, now we get to involve other people that we don't control, other people who have other motivations, their different hope streams, desire, what's a win for them. And that involves us doing a lot more than compelling our stakeholders to do what we hope them to do. So here we go, our adventure. Next slide. So the narrative arc today is going to have 3 phases. And so, you know, from a cognitive psychology perspective, it's always easy for us to like keep about 3 or 4 things in our head at the same time. So even as we're sort of unpacking stakeholders, we want to first start with identifying who they are. Then we're going to talk about engaging them, and then we're going to talk about organizing them. So we're sort of going to be flowing through this progression. So I think even Sam was saying, it's like, oh, like, look, there are different kinds of stakeholders. And so one of the things that we're going to talk very concretely about is we're going to talk about 4 different kinds of stakeholders and how each type impacts your change differently, because they can contribute different things categorically, and they have different motivations categorically. So once we identify them, we're going to talk a little bit about how we engage them. And so we're going to do a little exercise around that. And then finally, we're going to put it all together and weave together this sort of comprehensive stakeholder network, which allows us to do things like organizing them into subteams. Communication is a big thing. Strategy is a big thing. So, so that's where we're gonna culminate in that piece, because what it does is it creates a visual picture of how interdependent and how collectively cohesive all the stakeholders are in order to have successful change. Next slide. All right, so we're going to start with this first phase, which is identify stakeholders. Next slide. We love our definitions because definitions give rigor to our thinking. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to give our definition of a stakeholder, and that is any person or group who has a say in or is affected by the work and its outcomes. So has a say in or is affected by the work and its outcomes. Next slide. So given that definition, any person or group that has a say in or is affected by your work and its outcomes, let's just quickly do a round of council. And the council prompt is this. So what happens when we leave a stakeholder out of our change effort? And let's see if I can see you guys. Who wants to go first? What happens?
Well, you could wind up doing a lot of work that either somebody in a position of authority or even somebody not in authority that has a voice. I mean, you can wind up doing a lot of work that you have to start over again.
Right.
Even if not start over again, add a significant amount of work and not meet your goals in a timely fashion.
Good. Excellent. Jason?
You can also leave out key information because you never know where ideas may come from. One example I like to use is when I was on active duty, we used to complain about our reservists all the time. And after being deployed overseas, I learned that our reservists, they do the jobs that we do all the time. So that reservist may be a heavy equipment operator that operates equipment all the time and probably has more knowledge about it than I do because I only do it sometimes when I'm not doing other trainings. So you may leave out key information by not engaging everybody.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sam. And Valerie, what happens?
Well, I guess thinking back to sort of where my brain started this morning, we can we can sort of dictate what the policy and the procedures are going to be, but if we leave out the stakeholders, they may sort of refuse or, you know, sort of do whatever they can to get around whatever those policies or rules are, because they're not buying into whatever it is that we've sort of proclaimed.
Yep.
And then we have enforcement issues.
And right, then you have to compel and control. Fantastic. All right, fantastic. Well, you guys must have seen my next slide because articulated what exactly I was going to say. So as Valerie was saying, you know, if they're included, then you have a much higher likelihood of being successful because now they're working with you instead of against you. As Sam said, a lot of time they're a lot closer to the problem than you are. So we leave out this body of stakeholders all the time. So they have insight, they have knowledge, they have influence, they have awareness that we, sitting where we're sitting, we can't see or we don't have direct access to. And then the third thing I think was what Jason said, it could just be a lot of work we could do. If we don't accomplish objectives 1 and 2, why even bother with 3 through 7, as you said? So, so it just makes a lot more work. So this involving, at least thinking about how to strategically involve stakeholders throughout the change process is really critical to many hands make light work. But that said, next slide. We leave people out all the time, in spite of the fact that we know why we shouldn't. And so let's do a little bit of perspective taking. So let's sit now in the seat of having been left out ourselves as a stakeholder. So that one of the things that helps us be our better selves is to remember how it felt and what happened when we get left out. So it's a small group. We could actually go around again. So, but let's go ahead and just do a popcorn. Who wants to describe a time they got left out and what ended up happening as a result of them getting left out?
So one thing for federal surplus is our program is we follow the regulations set by federal agencies, by GSA, SBA, by the federal government. And a lot of times the state surpluses get left out in the decision making of implementing legislative changes, policy changes, things of that nature. And so those policies change, the laws change, and we end up dealing with the consequences, but we didn't have a voice in how are these legislative changes going to impact the state surpluses. And then we're having to try, then we end up having to try and make changes, get legislation passed to correct things that probably could have been corrected up front if we would have been, if the state surpluses would have had a voice in federal regulation.
Yeah, so I'm seeing lots of Band-Aids coming out.
Exactly.
You're having a Band-Aid a lot.
It's a good example.
Yeah. Anyone else have an example about the time you felt left out of a change effort?
Sam stole mine.
Yeah.
We had a really similar, so the governor has this initiative to get rid of unnecessary like rules and legislation. And so in looking at cutting out unnecessary stuff, someone said, oh, we can cut out these definitions from the rules because they're somewhere else, only they weren't actually identical. And now we have like an entire type of solicitation that is not actually within the definition of solicitation because it was in the rule that now doesn't exist. And it was like, if someone had just asked me, I could have told you, no, don't cut that. It's not identical and we need it. So yeah, kind of a similar situation.
Thanks, Valerie. Jason, you want to throw something in?
I don't really have a story that I can think of.
Good. All right, well, in that case, let's move on to the next question. So we know we should involve them. We know how it sucks when we get left and how like there's a huge amount of wasted time and resources about being left out. Well, let's get real for a second. Stakeholders get left out all the time. So the question really is, and Shannon's actually going to go to the next page and take notes, but the prompt is, actually go before you take notes. Let's go back to the, yeah. So the prompt is, given all that, we're human. We have a tendency to leave stakeholders out. So we can either think about it from our perspective, we can think about it from the governor's perspective, or from the, whoever. Why would we be tempted? Why do we leave stakeholders out? And this is sort of an open dialogue, and Shannon will take notes on the next page. Why are we tempted to leave stakeholders out?
Sometimes stakeholders can't, it seems like they cannot or are unwilling to think productively. They're stuck in a place where generally they just complain and can't become part of a team.
Right. So the concern is that they're not going to help. They're just going to make things more complicated. Okay.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times it's for timeliness. We're trying to get a change to happen. We're trying to make a change to something, and if you have a large group of stakeholders in that, every time you keep going back to include all of the stakeholders in it, you can end up beating a dead horse. You can end up, going back and forth over the same change over and over and over and over again, and it drags it out.
Right. Yeah. So for expediency, again, this whole idea of stakeholders are just going to impede progress, not facilitate it. Okay.
And sometimes just not knowing that there's somebody that is involved in whatever the thing is, not knowing that a stakeholder exists.
Right. Yeah, we just didn't know. So it's accidental, not on purpose.
I think sometimes we underestimate the value that the stakeholders can bring to solving the problem. So we make the mistake of thinking that we know enough to solve the problem on our own, and underestimate how valuable they can be in finding the best solution.
Yeah. I think a lot of what we've been talking about throughout this, my guess is a little bit of more curiosity. We're going to talk a little bit about curiosity today too.
I think the opposite side of the coin of being unaware of them and accidentally leaving them out is intentionally leaving them out, because we've caught word that they may try and sabotage the change, or we already know that they are against the change. So we will intentionally leave them out to try and get the change through.
Yeah, good.
And I'm adding the word afraid to that, because I mean, I've experienced this and I've seen this, like we know that, and it just seems too hard, or we're like nervous or somehow afraid of actually just dealing with whatever it is that they bring head on.
Absolutely.
And just in general, what usually happens when you marginalize a stakeholder like that? Do they go away?
No, you end up having to deal with it at some point.
Right, and it's even worse because now not only do they maybe have a different opinion, but they're pissed that you left them out.
Right. Yeah, you've just actually inflamed them. Right. Anything else we can think about? These are all really useful. It's useful to unpack because it'll be helpful for us to really, as we're beginning to rethink and reframe and reposition ourselves, our relationship to stakeholders, knowing all this is important. Okay, good. So we're gonna probably, we may not revisit it explicitly, but I think now that we've captured it in our work sessions, we're gonna talk a little bit about this. And I'm gonna talk specifically about some of the things that came out in this dialogue in the next section. So as you have already illustrated, not all stakeholders are created equal. That means they're categorically different things that they can contribute, that they care about, they influence in terms of your change efforts. So we're gonna do a sort of a dissection of what that is. So the next slide. We're gonna use this nice acronym again, 4 things. We can keep 4 things in our mind. And we love our acronyms, and this is awesome because we're gonna use the acronym PICK, right? Pick our stakeholders, P-I-C-K. P-I-C-K stands for 4 categories of stakeholders. The shorthand P for power, I for influence, C for consideration, and K for knowledge. So we're gonna do a little deeper dive on each of these. First slide. All right, our power people, right? So when we're thinking about a hierarchical system, these are the decision makers, right? These are the deciders. These are the bosses. And we need to keep them involved. Sometimes they don't want to be involved, but we need to keep them involved because they have hierarchical power to make things happen. They either have to make the decision because the buck stops with them. A lot of times they have resources, time, people, money that will be critical for our success. And as a result, their alignment and awareness, situational awareness of what's going on is absolutely critical. And we often notice that in spite of a leader occasionally saying, no, you're good, you get to the 11th hour and they pull the plug on the project, right? So there's a huge amount of sort of care and attention that we need to pay to our P people. And that's usually the most obvious category, but even so, we're gonna talk a little bit about how we later on, we're gonna talk a little bit about how we wanna the care and feeding of our P stakeholders. Because the other thing is they often are the champions, right? If you get them really part of the change effort, they can throw their firepower into the implementation. Next slide. This is my favorite category of stakeholder, actually. And what's really interesting about this is that you contrast them with the P stakeholders. So these are the ones that Sam was just talking about, the ones that can really, actually all 3 of you were talking about, the ones that can really kind of mess things up. We used to call these blockers. We used to just assign a negative sign, but we actually recognized after thinking about this, that it doesn't matter if they're a positive sign or a negative sign, they actually are the same kind of category of stakeholder. And we call these influencers. So these are stakeholders with influence. And they can do both things. Sometimes they can do both things simultaneously, which is kind of interesting. They can either be blockers, stallers, saboteurs of your work. But interestingly, these same people can, if engaged correctly, can actually turn into champions. And the reason why they can do that is because they actually have some sort of emotional or ego attachment to being involved in your change effort. And so when they are not heard, they often can put the brakes on things just to show you, because they have a lot of influence. And a lot of times this influence is not direct power per se, but it is political power, historical power, cultural power, personality power. And so you want to identify these guys and gals up front as part of our strategy and our change effort. And because they often possess something that can really move the needle on your change effort. And because there's a heart component to this, they are very passionate and they can be very loud, right? So you can put the duct tape over them, but chances are they're gonna bite you on the butt anyways. So we love our I stakeholders. We're gonna talk about those. Next slide. Third category. This is the largest category and the most likely to be left out in any sort of change effort, right? These are all the people that need consideration. We sometimes also call them constituents, right? These are the people that are impacted by the work. They are the focus of your work. They are also the largest and messiest and most unruly of the stakeholders. But their commitment to the behavioral change is often the focus of your work. And so by ignoring them, either on purpose or accidentally, you are setting yourself up either for ginormous success or ginormous failure. And in most sort of case studies of large scale change efforts, it's ignoring this large and unruly bunch that is the thing that often causes many, many initiatives to fail. Now, millions of dollars, we used to cite lots of business case studies, but we won't go into that. So part of our strategy is to find a way to sufficiently involve them so that they don't feel like they all can stick their fingers in everything, but that they have a piece that they can contribute. And by involving them early on, you actually build their potential commitment to whatever it is that they're doing and their hands, right? So their heart and their hands in the effort. And their heads can be involved too. So they can provide important insight like Sam was talking about, those with the folks boots on the ground. Next slide. Finally, this is often a category of stakeholder that gets ignored internally to the organization. Those people who actually possess technical, historical, cultural expertise that will actually help your change effort. So we want to think about these separate from those other three, because a lot of times they have some headpiece that's sort of missing. And so again, may provide some critical insight to the problem. Next slide. So this is sort of the summary slide, which I won't contribute, won't go over, but essentially it shows you that the different categories, they contribute different things and they can care about different things in your change effort. Next slide. Okay, let me see if there's any questions so far. So far? Good? Okay.
Looks like it.
So like I said, and I was teeing up, so we were already sort of unpacking this, but now we're going to go a little bit deeper, because within each stakeholder category, what they care about and what they can contribute are actually two very different things. And doing some strategy or some curiosity about what they care about can actually make a big difference, and qualitatively what they can contribute. So in your Medicaid example, you know, what's a win for them, right, could be a little bit different than what's a win for you guys, right? So what do they care about and how they can contribute, so that you can begin to enroll them as part of this change effort. And I'm hoping you guys are already thinking about your scope in terms of like, yeah, you know, this person contribute this, we don't really know what this person cares about, or this. So it begins to give you some scaffolding to how to think about them. So it's not just like, all these stakeholders, you know, we don't know what to do. Next slide.
Joanne, can I say a few things about these two questions?
Yes, please.
So I want to underscore what Joanne is saying in terms of how these two questions, when we think about our stakeholders, are fundamentally different than traditional change management approaches. So Valerie, as you were pointing out earlier, most change approaches are like, you know, it's a tell or a push or a mandate, and that happens in almost every organization that I've been a part of. And the decisions around what that change or mandate is comes from a small group of people who often hold hierarchical or positional power. And then they end up, quote unquote, you know, rolling it out. And then the change approach is about how do you identify resistance and how do you create buy-in, which implies that we're selling something that another person needs to say yes to. So these two questions, while it might seem kind of subtle, they are a 180-degree difference from that approach, right? So we're approaching our stakeholders from a very generative point of view, from a place of believing that they have something to contribute to the work that they're doing, and that they are coming in with a set of concerns or cares that are important for us to understand. So by shifting our position and our thinking around stakeholders and orienting around these two questions, what might they care about and what might they contribute, it creates fundamentally different energy around this act of enrolling versus this act of telling. And it makes this approach change with, and traditional approaches to change management I would describe as change to.
Yeah, it's reactive. Mm-hmm. What did you say? It's about managing, what did you say?
Managing resistance.
Managing resistance.
Yeah, that's what traditional change management talks about. It's like you go and you look for where's the resistance and who's going to be slow to adopt the change, right?
Yeah. So we're advocating a slightly different approach, which is a much more proactive and a little bit more thoughtful. And we're not talking about, you know, a huge amount of time. We're talking about just a little, I think a little prevention on the front end is worth 100 pounds of intervention on the back end. Thanks, Shannon, for that.
Yeah.
All right. Next slide. Any questions about that? Thank you, Shannon, for that unpacking.
Mm-hmm.
All right. In that case, we're going to move to our 9:30 section of our meeting design, meeting plan, in which what you're going to watch is just, it's a sort of a cooking show or fishbowl demonstration in which what we're going to do is we're going to take a real project that Shannon has worked on, and we're going to just sort of walk through sort of a really quick and dirty, how do you even begin this process of identifying stakeholders. So I invite you to join us on the link that says Fishbowl with Shannon.
Joanne, before we do that, I want to show the team this slide.
Yeah. Thank you.
So this slide came from when we were doing example scopes. This particular event was one of the examples that we showed to illustrate how scope is scalable. So in this particular situation, in this real project that Joanne and I are going to model, this is the scope. So our intent is to create a powerful public experience that illustrates the importance of diversity and inclusion in business. And we have 11 intended outcomes that we've articulated that are important for us to achieve in order to achieve this particular intent.
Cool.
So we're using this as we pick up in the fishbowl.
Right. And so what this ended up, this was a conference, right, that you guys had ended up putting together? Is that?
It's coming up. It's happening now. It's coming up.
Okay, so this is real time stakeholder analysis. Awesome. Yeah, so we want to, so the first thing before we leave this slide is, or actually we're just going to keep this slide up and then go ahead and, can you join me and look at that? Maybe you can't because
we can't, and I'm having, I need a moment to figure out how to get back to Zoom where I can actually, oh, if I stop sharing, I think. There we go. Okay.
Okay. All right.
Now I can, so if we go to the meeting design, and we hop on the fish, if everybody can hop on the link, it's fishbowl. So what you're going to see is today we're going to work through a series of worksheets. And so this is the first worksheet that we're going to be sort of modeling. Now, the purpose of the worksheet is not to follow it in lockstep necessarily, but to use it as a scaffold to help you think through what is initially sort of blooming, buzzing confusion of all the different stakeholders. And so I just want to sort of orient you a little bit to the worksheet itself, which is, you know, it starts pretty simply. Start with your intent statement. From your intent statement, consider who your stakeholders are. Maybe pick as a guide, and then begin to ponder what they can care and contribute. So Shannon, as we move into the second page, tell me just, oh, so we've already done a little bit of backstory. Is there anything else you want to say about the backstory before we? Well, I think what I would say is that this is an annual event. In the 2019 event, which was my first year in the leadership role, it was the first time we'd actually formed a team and thought about stakeholders. And so now this is our second year of, the summit has occurred for multiple years, but this is my second year leading, and it's the second time we've thought intentionally about stakeholders and how do we organize ourselves beyond just one person pulling off the summit.
Yeah. And remind me again just how big how many people do you end up?
This last year we had 350 people, and we had somewhere between 15 and 20 sponsoring organizations.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a good size event for one person to try to pull off on their own,
yes.
Right? Cool. So let's look at step 2. How did you go about coming up with your stakeholders?
I thought about them in a kind of a sequence. So the Institute, so the event is sponsored by something called the Blue Sky Institute, which is housed inside of Boise State University. So I first thought about our leadership team and the stakeholders within Boise State who care about what we do, because the Institute belongs to Boise State, and this is ultimately their event. All of the work that the Institute does around diversity and inclusion is guided by an executive committee, which is a group of volunteers from Boise State and other private corporations in Idaho, and they're very senior leaders. So they're usually their SVP of HR sits on the executive committee. So I thought about the executive committee as a stakeholder. Also then thought about because it's a summit, we obviously need sponsors and we need participants. So we need people to come, and then we'll need a team in terms of or expertise in terms of presenters, facilitators, and a team that has enough expertise to actually organize the summit.
Yeah. So, and just sort of listening to you talk about it, it's almost like, even if you didn't know PICK, like it's almost like naturally when we think about starting a project, you sort of like do this sort of natural flow through the different stakeholder types, right? So now we have this language, PICK. And so if we take this list of stakeholders and we move to step 3, so step 3 essentially has 4 columns on the page 3. So you have that same list from above, and then we kind of do a quick and dirty PICK analysis, and then we move to care and contribute. So, so when you migrated the stakeholders to this next step, was it pretty straightforward for you? So tell me a little bit about how you
the process.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I did the brain dump in step 2, then brought them down into step 3, and then wanted the second column. The question is, what's the most strategic relationship? And sometimes stakeholders can have more than one. They can fit into more than one of the categories in PICK. So when they fit into one, that's a pretty straightforward process. So the university leadership team, or university leadership, the second row, is a pretty good example. They're a power stakeholder. We need to keep them informed and aligned, but otherwise they fully trust the team. And so the level of involvement that they will have is probably more limited. With stakeholders like our executive committee, which is down here in this like 5th or 6th row, they're complicated because they have influence. Some of them they're actually funders of Blue Sky, so they give, they provide money to the institute, so we have to care about them a little bit differently. They are attendees and sometimes sponsors of the summit also, so they require consideration from that perspective. And then in some cases, some of the members of the executive committee also have D&I expertise that we might want to capitalize on. So they were a little more complicated to think about how they fit.
Yeah. So one interesting sort of nuance about this, when people first start learning to do PICK, oftentimes they assign PICK to everybody, right? Everybody's PICK, and then. But what you've actually highlighted is when push comes to shove, you always want to assign the P people their P status, because that's how they're exerting their change, right? And you want to identify the influencers because they don't have hierarchical authority, but they can really make things easier, make things difficult. I know one of the things that, so maybe I'll jump the gun on the script a little bit, but given the I and the C and the K of the executive committee, I think one of the things that we recognize later on is if we had been a little bit more granular. You want to talk a little bit about just sort of unpacking the.
Yeah, so I, in doing this, my initial thinking was to come up with groups. So I have to think about them in bigger categories, like all of the executive committee, or where's another good example? All of the community. So like in step 2, I have community listed as a stakeholder. In reality, there's multiple subgroups inside of community, and that we need to be thinking about in terms of how we involve in the summit. So like nonprofits are a specific kind of community organization. We would include them differently than we might think about other universities like College of Idaho or CWI or U of I, right? How do we want to involve them? So it's good, I think, for the first pass to think in broad buckets, but then there's also another iteration where you have to sometimes get more specific.
Yeah. So one of the things, like scope is sort of iterative. This is sort of iterative too, right? This is a great first pass, and we did not want to give you the full, as the demo, right? The full actual, because it would make your head explode. But the idea of like having this like meta view, and then as you're going to get to the work, get a little bit more granular. This sort of framework gives you a little bit more organization to that process.
Yeah.
All right. So you did the first column and the second column. So I'm sort of curious. if you, Shannon, are going to go and complete things from scratch, which column, care or contribute, are you sort of naturally inclined to start with first? What would you do, and why would you choose what you do?
I think for me it's care, because I think the reason for that is that if I'm thinking about what the stakeholder cares about from their perspective, it informs me in terms of the most strategic relationship that I want to establish with them, and then how I want to enroll them or engage them. So if they care about, I guess what I'm trying to say is I would use what they care about to inform how I work with them, so they're more likely to want to be involved and committed to the work.
Interesting. Because I think I would probably do it the opposite, because that's just how I'm, right? So depending on how you're wired, one is easier, one you're just naturally gravitating to one versus the other. So the point of this is that there's no right or wrong way to do it, right? It's like whatever you always want to get the easy stuff, down first. Cool. So my last question is, so having gone through this process, fishbowl, Shannon, what was informative? What were you able to see and observe that you couldn't otherwise?
I think getting the list of everybody on paper, right? So getting, like, it's all in my head, but then getting a holistic view on paper is super helpful. I did have the insight as I was doing that around needing to break up some of the stakeholder groups into smaller buckets. And then I also noticed something for me that I think was missing, which was, I kind of noted it here. As I went back and looked at it, I realized that I was probably limited in thinking about what our sponsors care about. So they do care about the fact that their name and their brand is going to be visible to a large audience, but they also care about the content of the experience and the quality of the experience, because it's a reflection of their brand, and because they're sponsoring because they're passionate about this particular topic and body of work.
Yeah. Thanks.
So it helped me to see that maybe I also need to remain curious, right, about, and not just assume that I know what they're interested in.
Right. And to that point, if you're going through this, and this is a fairly well thought out and fleshed out stakeholder analysis, a lot of times we just don't know. Right. And so what it does is it invites us to go, I have no idea what they care about. Right. It does invite that sort of curiosity to go seek out some more information. And because it's kind of a nice little cell block on a sheet, it doesn't mean you're going to enter in this like unended, long, I don't know where this conversation is going to go kind of inquiry. Right. You're actually making a very strategic investigation. Right? It causes you to go, I need to know what they care about before I can enroll them in this. Mm-hmm. Cool. So I'm going to throw this open to the group. You sort of watched us sort of walk through this. Any questions or observations that you want to make about this little fishbowl you just watched?
I don't know. It seems like, the care regarding the care and contribute columns, it seems intuitive to start with care, because that kind of, to me, casts a broader net of who should be included in the process.
Good.
So Jason, you're saying even using that question to frame building your first list, like who might care about this work?
Yes.
Yeah. Great. That's great.
That's fantastic. Good observation. Any other thoughts or questions or observations? Because you're going to try it next.
So I think I also naturally, I probably would do care first, but I think what I like about this is I think I probably tend to stop there, at least in my brain, and not go to the what can they contribute. So I'm like, okay, they care, so I'm going to think about them, but I don't sort of naturally go that next step of, okay, well, if they care, then they might be able to help, not just be thought about, right? So I think that I like that.
Nice.
Forces you to take that extra step of not just thinking about them, but actually getting them involved.
Yeah, many hands make light work. Awesome observation. All right. If nothing else, then Shannon, I'm going to turn
Yeah.
things over to you. It's.
I think we're actually going to take a break. Sam,
Yeah.
Sam, I saw your arm moving. Were you reaching for your unmute button?
No, he's muted.
No, I was, but.
What were you going to say?
What's that?
What were you going to say?
Actually, no. I was reaching for my unmute button because I thought that I was going to be asked like if I had any input on that, and I didn't have any input. So, but I was prepping myself. I was preparing myself to.
As long as it's good to see you're still with us. Okay. Well, if there are no other questions, we're a little ahead of schedule, which is great. So let's take a 5-minute break, and we'll come back at 9:45, and it'll be time for you guys to start. And I'm going to hit pause.
Pause the recording.
On the recording.
All right.
Okay. See you in 5 minutes. All right. Welcome back, everybody. So we are in our meeting design. We're at our 9:50 slot at about 9:47, and we're moving into an opportunity for you guys to practice what Joanne and I just modeled in the fishbowl. And originally, I had separated Valerie and Chelsea into 2 separate groups since they had, I think, are closest to this particular problem. But without Chelsea, what we're going to do is, Jason, you're going to work with Joanne. My sense of your proximity to this problem is that you're close enough and you have enough history to have a perspective about stakeholders without Valerie or Chelsea present. And then Sam, you and Valerie and I will work together. Our steps are going to be, so step 3, we're going to examine and identify our stakeholders using the worksheet. Inside of that, I want to break this, our time up. We have about 25 minutes. As you're looking at the worksheet, we'll spend about 10 minutes on step 2. So that first, just cataloging all of the stakeholders using PIC as a framework. And then in step 3, we move to thinking about the most strategic relationship for that particular stakeholder and what do they care about and what they can contribute. So Joanne and I will guide you. The worksheet also has all of the directions, but we'll have about 25 minutes total to do that. Then we're going to come back together, and for step 4, we're going to debrief the experience and provide some reflections to each other. One of the things that I'm curious about, because we're each going to be working the same set of stakeholders, so the intent that we're working with is your intent from the Medicaid scope. I think it's going to be interesting to see how each team is looking at the stakeholders for that particular change effort, either similarly or different. And then we have about 5 minutes for comments or questions. So about a 45-minute chunk of time to really dive into this particular scope and your stakeholders.
Hey, Shannon, right now our group 1 is going to group 2. Would you be able to quickly change that?
Could I quickly fix that? Let me see where group 2 is going.
Group 2 is going to group 2. Everyone's going to group 2.
Everybody's going to, it's definitely the same worksheet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Let me fix that really fast.
Yes. I was having a little bit like, I don't know how to do this quickly.
I know I have it there.
So we use the Zoom breakout groups thing during a virtual board meeting I have a board that I'm the chair of that there's way too many people on. And so we had like 20 people or 25, actually more because we had staff. So like 30 people that we were breaking out into like 3 or 4 different groups. Only not everyone realized there was some confusion about how to like register and log in to the Zoom meeting. And so like 10 or 15 people all ended up registered as the same person because they used the person's link. So then we had like 10 Bob Sieverts. So when we tried to split into groups, like Bob, it was a little bit of a fiasco. Luckily the technology was not my problem. So I didn't have to, I was just like, whatever, I'm going to whatever group I'm going to, it's fine. But it was kind of funny. I was like, well, will the real Bob Sievert please stand up and everybody else go back in using your actual link because that's the only way this is going to work. It was hilarious.
Okay.
All right.
We are fixed. So any thoughts or questions about our process? Otherwise, I am going to put us into our breakout groups. Okay, so I need 2 rooms. I want to assign them manually, create rooms. So Joanne, just check me. So you and Jason are group 1, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Assign.
Don't forget that you're going to set the timer before you send it.
And then options. So I'm going to put us in our breakout room for 25 minutes. And I'm going to give us a minute countdown. Okay.
So is it 24 plus 1 or is it 25 plus 1? I think 24 plus 1 is fine.
It just says breakout rooms close automatically after 25 minutes. So I think we're good.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. Opening all rooms. Hello, are we all back?
Well, we were working so hard that he caused the whole internet to crash. So Jason,
Uh-oh, is he coming? Is he on his way back?
he's trying to reboot right now. So
Okay. Okay.
we were cooking with gas up until
Wow.
Okay. How long ago did he exit?
It's been a while.
Okay.
We've been emailing back and forth. He's
Okay. I'm just wondering if we should give him a sec or we should just go ahead.
I'd be actually happy to.
Oh, here he comes.
Oh, here he is. Ta-da! Perfect.
Yay, Jason. Well, okay, so we're Jason, glad you're back. We are at step 4 of our process. Why don't we start with group 1?
Okay.
So when you and Jason want to go, so Valerie and Sam, we can join group 1 on their worksheet.
So Jason, I was telling Shan that we were working so hard we blew up the internet.
Indeed.
So I'll just do a little bit of voiceover, let Jason catch his breath, because I know he's been trying to get his computer to work up. We actually decided to engage with this worksheet a little bit differently. We went straight to step 3 and just went through each category. And so I'm super curious what you guys came up with. But if you join us on page 3, what you'll see is I just simply interviewed him and I'm like, okay, who has all the power here? So we went through first the power people, and then we had an interesting discussion about influence. And then we did a really interesting bifurcation. I really appreciated Jason's insight on this. We divided our C constituencies into 2 Cs just as a way to get a little bit of clarity. So the internal Cs and the external Cs. And just when we started turning to what they could care about, we blew up the internet. So that's as far as we got, but so Jason, I'm kind of curious, like, I'm going to give us a little bit of reflection of what it was like to, is that okay, Shan, for me to ask him that?
Yeah, oh yeah, please do, yeah.
It was just having to do the exercise, the pick, going through pick. It really helped me to think things out, and I mean, it's really the benefit of the process. I thought of people that if I would have probably thought about this before today, I might not have considered all the people that were going to be, that should be thought of as stakeholders. So that was good. And then for the little bit that we got to do in care, these are my thoughts just based on my experience with directors and legislators. We got to type in that laws need to be followed, but really it seems like when legislators are involved, they want to bring their influence to bear to keep projects moving, and also to make sure that taxpayer funds are well spent.
Thanks.
Great.
That's what we got.
Cool. So Valerie and Sam, let's everybody hop over to group 2. We'll let, Valerie, why don't you and Sam, you want to do the voiceover? And then we'll do a little compare and contrast.
So you want me to walk through this?
I want you, yes, as the thought partner to Valerie. Yeah, put some voice to what you saw in her process.
So, obviously, Valerie having more direct experience with this, she knew a lot more of the stakeholders than I did. And comparing with group 1s, I see a lot of them compare. But I also saw in group 1, a couple that, we hadn't thought of either. And, I don't know about how Valerie approached it. The way I approached it when thinking of the stakeholders was, I was thinking of them, I kind of started at the middle of the purchasing staff and, everybody who's directly working on the contract. So my train of thought was I started in the middle, and then who is above those people, which would be power, and who falls below that line. I don't want to say below those people, but who falls below that line, which would be the consideration, the knowledge that impacts the people directly working on it, the influence could be in the middle or above. That's the way I looked at it, as just in a train of thought to try and encapsulate everybody was, starting at the middle, working all the way to the top of who has power and influence, and working all the way to the bottom of who we need to consider in this and who has knowledge that could influence it. And then Valerie brought up the point of, that there was a couple, just as an outsider looking in, I threw out a couple of questions in it, and it spurred, thought of people she hadn't thought of, probably would have thought of, but just in the spur of the moment didn't think of.
Yeah, and Sam, why don't you share with Joanne and Jason what that question was?
So basically, I asked the question of, when contracts, like when this contract is being worked on, is there other states or other Medicaid groups that are reached out to try and see how they do things? I'm an adamant person about not reinventing the wheel. My philosophy is that probably everything that we can ever think of doing has probably already been done at some point out there. So I like to reach out and try and resource with where it might have already been done. And so, that spurred up the other state Medicaid programs, the other state procurement teams that work on that stuff too.
Great.
So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, my eye went right there when I initially, I was like, oh my God, that's brilliant, right? It's like, yeah, of course they got knowledge.
Yeah. Valerie, what would you add to Sam's voiceover around your process or how this contributed to your thinking?
Yeah, so it's interesting because the way that I was sort of thinking about it, because when we did the scope exercise, we were talking a lot in terms of the 3 groups at the, so DOP, CAPS, Medicaid. That was kind of where my brain went as far as sort of grouping, okay, who are the different groups within Medicaid? There's leadership, and then there's the contract managers. Who are the different, kind of groups, stakeholders within CAPS and then DOP. And then sort of, to Sam's point, kind of up the ladder from a leadership perspective, and then kind of out from there. So yeah, and it was interesting going through the, we did the care and contribute for one of each to try to hit one of each. And what we started out with was Medicaid leadership. And I said, oh, getting a successful contract and contract that's enforceable. And then we went down to contract managers. I was like, oh, you know what? That's actually what they care about. Leadership actually just cares about making the governor's office and the legislature happy. Like, that sounds a little cynical, but and we had a conversation about, like, they do, I think, genuinely care about providing good service to Medicaid eligible people in the state. But like their primary day-to-day care is like not getting fired, right? Because they're having a successful program and keeping the powers that be happy. So that was kind of an interesting, it took a little while to sort of walk through that thought process. But yeah, it was definitely interesting. And as I've felt with every single like module that we've gone through so far, what seems really simple, once you get into it, is like, man, like I'm really working my brain and like thinking of things that I hadn't thought about. And, you know, Shannon had mentioned to Chelsea and I that we were going to use this as kind of our practice during this workshop. So I had thought about it a little bit in advance, and I came up with like a quarter of what we were able to come up with as a group. So definitely just the practice of going through this, I think, has got my brain really, you know, really working, which is great.
Great, thanks. Jason and Joanne, anything that you notice in Valerie and Sam's work that's similar to or different from what you came up with that you want to share with us?
Their person or group column is way more comprehensive. I feel like I should have thought of LSO because they tend to be involved in these high visibility, high dollar things. Office for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, that's really the only comment I have.
Great. A couple things, maybe just sort of in summary. So on your point about the motivation for Medicaid leadership and having a sort of new awareness around that, I think that's really valuable, because when we talk about how we engage and organize stakeholders, that begins to inform how we might do that, right? So if there's a high degree of care from Medicaid leadership about the governor and the legislature, there may be a way of thinking about how to make sure that there's connections there from a stakeholder engagement perspective, and or there's information flowing that's relevant, that taps into what they care about, what Medicaid leadership cares about. The other thing, Jason, I would just say in terms of, I think the list that you and Joanne came up with is thorough. The value, I think, in thinking about it in a structured way and with other people is that you're all bringing different perspectives to the table. So in the same way that we build a fuller view of the situation when we do this, when we do scope with a group, the same is true for stakeholders, right? So there's nothing wrong, right, with having somebody else come up with somebody that you didn't think about. That's just the value of working, I think, with multiple perspectives and multiple people. Joanne, anything you want to say by way of bringing this part of our exercise to a close?
No, but I think the only thing I would say is just even being part of the process, and we've experienced this with Scope too, just being in the process of identifying stakeholders. Like I already feel like my care and concern over this project has gone from nothing to like, oh, I'm curious about this. Like I want to help, right? So
right.
The act of enrolling even external stakeholders in this exercise, and also just the rapidity in which you guys did this in 10 minutes, right? That's amazing, right? So you don't have to spend hours and hours and hours doing this. I mean, you can, but the initial getting the ball rolling is actually pretty fast. So just wanted to normalize that.
Awesome, thanks. Any final comments or questions, Sam, Jason, or Valerie? Okay, great work, you guys. So we're like 5 minutes ahead of schedule again. Let's take a 10-minute break. So let's come back at 10:40. Sound good? Okay, great. And I'm going to pause the recording. Okay, welcome back. We are at our 10:45 slot on the meeting design at 10:40. So we're keeping a great pace this morning. And we're moving into two pieces of content before we do another fishbowl. So the first piece of content is around engaging stakeholders. I'm going to do a little presenting. We do have a council question for the team, and then we'll take questions and answers. So I am going to share my screen. Let me do that. Keep sharing. Okay. So we're moving into our conversation around engaging stakeholders. We've just learned about the 4 different kinds of stakeholder types and how to identify them. And then the next, if we think about the slide that Joanne showed when we started, the next piece of our arc is then thinking about how to engage stakeholders. And as we do that, I want to first ask the team a question. So what are different ways to involve and engage stakeholders? Just do a bit of a popcorn brainstorm. What are different ways that you guys can think of for engaging and involving stakeholders?
Call them. I don't know if we're thinking that simplistically.
And what did you say, Jason?
I said call them.
You can call, yeah, like call them up and have a conversation.
Yeah.
How else might we engage our stakeholders?
I mean, I think you can provide information. So, you know, this is what we're thinking about, or this is the path, or, you know, whatever. And then ask for feedback, and you can sort of do that formally or informally.
Yeah, so what you first articulated, Valerie, is sharing information, right? So that's sort of a communication or some way of keeping them informed, and then seeking their feedback, right? So looking for input or feedback. Great. Other thoughts? Sam, how from your perspective, what are different ways to involve and engage our stakeholders?
You can, you know, like form a committee,
Yep.
and the committee could involve each aspect of the different stakeholders within the committee. You know, and maybe not all of the stakeholders involved in, you know, for example, the Medicaid, if there was a committee formed about the Medicaid, it could include aspects of the 4 different types of stakeholders, you know, but under like the public that Medicaid will affect, you may not have everybody from the public on the committee, but there could be some people. You could have a few people from the public on the committee to provide.
And so in thinking about a committee, actually, you're doing some foreshadowing, which is great for how we might organize ourselves. And then thinking about when we do organize ourselves, how do we have a nice cross section of stakeholders, across PIC, involved in the work, right? And the value of that would be that we're including those different perspectives in the work that we're doing. So those are all different ways to engage stakeholders. I'm going to share my screen. All right, I'm sharing my screen. I'm going to put it in present mode. Perfect. So we're going to be looking at PIC again as our model or framework for identifying stakeholders, and then thinking about, based on the stakeholder type that they are, different ways to engage them. And in the same way that we reintroduced this idea of thinking about outcomes when we were developing outcomes from scope, so we're pulling that skill of outcomes from meetings into scope, we can also now be thinking about and specifically using our 6 different categories of intended outcomes from meetings. We can be thinking about how they inform how we might want to engage our stakeholders to accomplish our intent. And so these are the 6 different flavors, so to speak, of outcomes that we talked about in meetings. Share information, which Valerie, you talked about. Obtaining input, which would be about seeking feedback. We can advance thinking, we can make decisions, we can obtain action, and we can also build community with our stakeholders as we're seeking to create change. So let's take a look at each of the stakeholder types, starting with power, and think about ways that we might involve them. So remembering that our P or power stakeholders are those who have positional authority, and they often control the purse strings. You know, they have money, they have resources, they have the ability to stop or start our change effort. We want to be really strategic about how and when we engage our power stakeholders. And these are the things that they may be interested in. They absolutely, we want to share information with them. We probably want to seek their input, and specifically we might want to inquire with them where and how they want to be involved. We would definitely advance thinking with our power stakeholders, so determining key decision points and deliverables in our change effort. making decisions around milestones and deadlines. And we may also obtain action. So we may be asking our power stakeholders to either execute things or to show up visibly for us as a leader or a champion of this particular change effort. And the more that we can engage our P stakeholders in advance about what they want to be included and how they want to be included, the better. I would also say that oftentimes when we're working with our power stakeholders, they may communicate to us that they're fine, right? Like, oh, I don't need to be involved, or, you know, the team's got this, let the team run with it. And that is likely true. But I would advocate that as you're designing your strategies for engaging your power stakeholders, that you keep them closer rather than further away. So even though that they say less is more, that can often come back to bite us in the end. Our next stakeholder type are influencers, and remembering that they are those who can formally advance or impede progress. We think of them sometimes as, Joanne talked about, blockers. We can also think about them as helpers. Our influencers are often just need to know that they are in the loop and involved. So we want to build community with our influencers by assessing their perceived needs. Do they need information and communication? Are they looking for ways to provide input and feedback? For those influencers who may turn to blockers, do they need or have a need for a sense of control? And if they do, why is that? What can we do in terms of how we engage them that helps to satisfy that need so that they remain a helper rather than a blocker? So for our influencers, again, we want to obtain their input and determining the best strategy for involvement. And particularly with influencers, we want to engage with curiosity and with openness. So the influencers are Joanne's favorite kind of stakeholder. The C stakeholders, those who require consideration, are my favorite kind of stakeholder. I think it's because I totally enjoy, particularly in the work that I've done in larger organizations, thinking about how you creatively involve your C stakeholders, because that typically means your employees. And I love the process of getting employees at all levels involved in change. So again, our C stakeholders are anyone who is affected by our work. And often in large scale change efforts, these are the stakeholders who are least considered, even though they're the people for whom we're seeking to change their behavior. So there are multiple ways to think about how do we engage our C stakeholders. We can share information and build community, right? We want to keep them in the loop about the change. We can obtain input, seeking their feedback on existing ideas. So oftentimes if a C stakeholder has to change their behavior or is heavily impacted by the change, getting their input on what they need to be successful can be an awesome strategy in terms of making the change more successful and enrolling them in the process. We can use them to advance our thinking. If they're the boots on the ground, they likely have great ideas for how to advance our thinking around solving this particular problem. We can also ask them for action, right? We can ask for champions or people who are willing to visibly step forward or perhaps be a peer leader for leading the change. And the more that we can engage our C stakeholders, the more our approach for change will be changed with, and the less it will be changed to. And then from my perspective, our perspective, that makes the change ultimately that much more successful. And then the last kind of stakeholder that we're thinking about engaging are our K stakeholders, or knowledge. And again, these are our stakeholders who bring content expertise or insight, right? They know stuff, they have expertise that's important to us. So they can help us by advancing our thinking, and they can also provide useful input. We also want to think about how can we share information with our knowledge stakeholders. So once we've asked them for their input and to contribute to our change, they're now invested likely in what we're doing. So how can we continue to share information to keep them in the loop? So those are some ways that we can engage our stakeholders. Any thoughts or questions before we shift to thinking about how we organize stakeholders? All good, pretty straightforward. Valerie's nodding, okay. Jason, Sam, you guys good? Okay. All right, so what time is it? We're cruising. So it's 10:50. We're going to move into our organized stakeholders conversation. So I'm going to, again, same process. I'm going to do some presenting. I would encourage you guys to, then when we're going to move into the fishbowl, we're going to do a couple of things. I just want to foreshadow it. So we're going to, I'm going to show you my work around what I did around organizing stakeholders. And then when Joanne helps us visualize the network, I want you guys to join in that conversation to help build our stakeholder network. And having an understanding of these different ways of organizing stakeholders is going to make building that stakeholder network that much easier. So with that, let me pop into organizing stakeholders. All right, so we've used PIC to identify our stakeholders. We're approaching our stakeholders with curiosity, right? We're seeking to understand what they care about and what they can contribute. And now we want to organize them such that we gain the most from their contribution. So that's this middle circle on the slide. And we have 4 primary ways of organizing our stakeholders. So the first is a core team. The second is a sub-team, or Sam, as you were talking about beginning to organize stakeholders committee, and we actually have gone back and forth in terms of which language that we use, same thing, sub-team or committee. The third way of organizing stakeholders is around specific feedback or input. So Valerie, what you were describing in terms of wanting to get contribution from our stakeholders. And then the fourth is communication. So we're going to take a closer look at each of these 4 kinds of ways of organizing stakeholders. So the first element of organizing our stakeholders is the core team. And we define the core team as the central working body for our change initiative. The responsibilities of the core team are to set the strategy and to make the decisions. You know, the core team is really examining and processing all of the incoming information, data, and feedback that's pertinent or relevant to our change effort. They're responsible for tracking progress and milestones, and they're really, and this is the element of stakeholders that I love. They're the architect of involvement of how all the stakeholders fit in the change effort. So the core team would be responsible for doing, like in the work that you're doing around Medicaid, the stakeholder analysis, and then really beginning to think about what is the best way to engage and organize our stakeholders. How can we architect that such that we're getting everything that they care and they can contribute to our change effort. When we think about the size of our core team, we want it to be no more than 8 people. Anything beyond that gets a little bit unwieldy in terms of the kind of group process that the core team needs to do in decision-making in particular. And it's not a requirement, and Sam, you were alluding to this when you were talking about committees, but it is possible, and it's worth thinking about, is it valuable to have representation on your core team across all your stakeholder types? So you know, PICK kinds of stakeholders, because what that will mean is that you're then getting diverse perspectives and therefore improved decision-making and strategy setting within the work of the core team. So the core team is really the central working body. The second element of organizing stakeholders are sub-teams or committees, and sub-teams have the responsibility to work on specific aspects of the change effort. So they're generating information, ideas, and outcomes. So if we think about the outcomes that are a part of our scope, there's definitely work and deliverables that are a part of those outcomes that become the responsibility of our sub-teams. They can create communication and feedback events as needed for additional constituent input. So they're thinking about, for the constituents that are, or those who require consideration and are constituents of our change, how do we communicate and engage with them? And it's the job, and Joanne's going to talk about a specific role that does this, but it's the job of the sub-team or the committee to remain in consistent communication and alignment with the core team. All right, our third kind of organizing is around specific feedback and input events. And these are feedback and input events that support specific aspects of the change effort. So we're using them to generate ideas, information, and outcomes. We are using these events to provide feedback and upgrades to our work. This is an excellent way to engage our constituents or those who require consideration, stakeholders. And ways that we might do this are surveys, focus groups, town halls, other ways of our engagement activities. Some things that we want to think about is that we want to design events to make sure that when we do get feedback, that it's high quality and that it's usable. It's also an opportunity for us to be thinking about how do we engage our stakeholders from a head, heart, and hand perspective. So how can we tap into their intellect, their emotion, and how can we actually enroll them from a hand perspective in the act of giving feedback and creating change. When we do ask for feedback from any of our stakeholders in a feedback event, we want to make sure that we're explicit about how that feedback and input will be used. I've seen this work really well, and I've seen it go awry. So if we ask for feedback as an example, on a set of topics that are broader than what we are actually willing to consider the input on. Like if we're not going to make changes based on people's feedback, we shouldn't ask for that input. So we want to keep the lane of feedback that we ask for tailored to the places where we're truly willing as a core team or a sub team to adjust or change efforts based on the input that we're receiving. Because when we don't do that, and we probably all experience this, the unintended consequences that we end up disengaging our stakeholders from whom we've asked for the input. And sort of relatedly, the feedback and input events are really good ways to demonstrate trustworthiness and to build trust with our stakeholders, particularly if we've executed those well. The last thing I'll say about feedback and input events is that, and this is important as we begin to think about how we create our stakeholder network, but feedback and input events can also be captured when we're creating our stakeholder network as stakeholder groups that you meet with regularly for the purpose of getting their input and remaining aligned. So leadership teams, boards, executive committees, those are good examples where you're going to probably regularly be going for input, and you would capture that feedback and input event as that stakeholder group itself. And this is an example from a strategic plan that Joanne led the development of. And JC, I'll give you the chance to share this particular example with the team.
Yeah, I think it's a really particularly lovely illustration of some of the things that Shannon was talking about with regards to feedback and input events. In particular, you know, when you guys did that initial brainstorm about why you want to leave stakeholders out, is because there's too many of them and it feels too overwhelming and you don't really know how to do it well. And so in a typical strategic planning process, it is really difficult to actually get your constituents to feel at all part of the strategic planning creation. A lot of times what we're doing is we're sort of shoving it down their throats as the plan has already been created, and a lot of this resistance mitigation that Shannon was talking about is what you end up with. So this particular exercise was created at the very early stages of the strategic planning process as a way to begin to engage the stakeholders. This is a K-8 school in Houston, Texas, as a way to have them see themselves as part of the story arc of the school in order to build their engagement for creating its future. So this was a very specific strategic initiative that outcome that we were seeking to make. And so what we did was we created a timeline that essentially told the story of the school from 1939 all the way up to the present. And each dot, we invited in a big town hall meeting, we invited every teacher, staff person, administrator, and then we actually invited kids to put themselves on this timeline as a way of seeing themselves as part of the narrative arc. So what you see, of course, most of the folks are on that right-hand side, but it was a particularly innovative way, I think, for them to see themselves in the larger change effort in a way that didn't involve a focus group or a survey. And so I just like to use this illustration because it's kind of a neato way. And then we invited the board of trustees to do, which is the reason why some of the other dots are further along the way. But just as a way to say, you know, it doesn't all have to be just
Right.
focus groups and interviews.
Yeah, and the simple act of putting your dot on the timeline is like, you've done something physically that says you're part of the process, right? You're part of the story. Totally cool. Thank you. All right, the last kind of event are communication events. So communication events inform our stakeholders on aspects of the change. It's essential to keep all stakeholders informed. And we have this little side note, is especially if they don't realize they are stakeholders. They may not see themselves as stakeholders in your change effort, but if you've done your PIC analysis, and particularly for some of our, maybe our C stakeholders, they are. We want to take extra care and attention to keep them informed. That's a prevention from a communications perspective. An effective communication event also provides an opportunity for stakeholders to opt in to a committee or a feedback or sub-team or a feedback input or event. So I think we're naturally, particularly in bigger organizations, but we're programmed for communication to always feel like it's one way. So to be thinking about how you can create, even if it's simple ways, two-way communication. And then thirdly, and this is true, I guess, generally, but I think of it in terms of change initiatives within an organization. But what are the communication channels and mechanisms that already exist that work best for your stakeholders? So you don't need to always be building something new. If there's already a channel that you can plug into that you know is going to reach your stakeholders, use that. Okay, so with that, thoughts or questions about our 4 primary ways of organizing stakeholders?
Can I just make an add to the previous slide?
Yeah.
One of the things that we often say is useful about these communication events, especially in that second bullet point of opting in, is the self-identification of a champion. Right? A lot of times we're dealing with a huge unknown sea of constituents or people who require consideration. And we often feel disconnected from who they are. A thoughtful communication event like this can really help you identify. So I think we talked about, stakeholders who don't know their stakeholders, or sometimes we don't know their stakeholders, or they might possess some sort of knowledge. It's a way to begin to stitch the change effort much more closely to the lives of your broader constituency.
Cool, thanks. Any thoughts or questions from the team? All good so far? Okay, all right. With that, Joanne, then I will transition to you.
Great, well, don't stop sharing your screen.
Okay.
We're gonna go to the next slide. So we're gonna move into this next phase. And so before we go back to Shannon's fishbowl, I want to just do a little bit of teaching of this. So go to the next slide. We're not going to have a lot of time to unpack this today. I have a feeling this is going to be part of the work of the work session and then the work moving forward. But one of the things that we think is really important to do, and Shannon and I actually have a client right now, which they skipped over this step, and it's kind of created a little bit of a mess. In that, once you form your teams, once you form your aggregations, especially your core team, your sub-teams, it's really, really important to clarify upfront what the role of each person on the team and what their responsibility is. Like, what's their purview? Do they have decision-making authority? And so we're not going to unpack that too much more here, except for to say that there's a special role that I wanted to highlight in this time, which is the role of the liaison. And the liaison performs a very specific role because this person essentially is the human conduit through which that communication channel, that two-way communication channel that Shannon was talking about, flows through. So that person's responsibility is to make sure that the information is going at highest level of fidelity. Oftentimes, we often don't make that explicit, or we sort of say, well, Shannon and Joanne will just do that because they do that anyways. And so we want to be very kind of prescriptive about the role of that person. So next slide.
We actually need to do the fishbowl.
We do? Sorry. Okay, we're gonna do the fishbowl. Thank you.
Yeah.
I've got lost in my notes. Let's join us on the Shannon's first pass. Thank you, Shannon.
Sure.
Because you'll see that liaison pop up in this thing. Okay, so let me get my notes up. Tell me, okay, so, all right, so we have now a different worksheet. It looks in some ways similar, but now we are moving beyond just PICK, and we're beginning to figure out how we're going to organize them. So, and the way this worksheet is laid out, we again have the intent. This time we have added our intended outcomes because the intended outcome sort of informs us how we're going to organize the work. And then we have a special sort of step 3, which is the identification of the core team. And then step 4 is all the other teams and events. So Shannon, when you began to think about how to organize your stakeholders, what was the first thing? Where did you start in
Did we
this?
start? We actually started, if we scroll down onto page 3, we started with a sub-team, which we're calling the Summit Planning Committee. So a couple of things I would say about this particular sub-team is that it's a group of volunteers, and we being myself and Cody, who's the other lead for this work, we intentionally recruited those volunteers from our other groups of stakeholders. So we recruited them from organizations that are represented on our executive committee and organizations that have historically sponsored the summit, because we were looking to increase their ownership in the work that we were doing, and based on having members of their organizations participate on the planning team. It also helps us know that we're meeting as sponsors in the executive committee. We're going to be doing a better job of meeting their needs. In our first meeting with this group, we had thought through the sub-teams that we wanted, and we asked for volunteers to sit on each of the sub-teams and to lead the sub-teams. And then that informed who would be our core team. So core team came second.
Came second after. So from the sub-team, then you went back up to the core team and formed based upon how you envision the people on your summit committee to contribute to the work.
And how they envision themselves, right? Because they self-select. We had a straw man structure of the sub-teams we thought we needed, but they self-selected into those sub-teams.
So let's talk through a couple of the sub-teams, and then we'll go back up to the core team.
Okay.
So talk to me about where these sub-teams came from.
Yeah, so they, and this is, I'll just sort of, this is the sort of like, this is art and science of doing this. There's no standard recipe. But what Cody and I did was we looked at all of our intended outcomes. So things like clarity on event audiences, a clear and compelling event theme and messaging, a communication plan, a sponsorship package, quality content and speakers. Like, we looked at all of those intended outcomes, and we thought about the deliverables that might be associated with each of those. And then we began to think about how could we organize those into some sub-teams that made sense based on like work being done within a sub-team. So the sub-teams that we came up with are the overall design, and that team has specific responsibility for the overall experience of the summit. So really thinking about the narrative arc and knitting the whole experience together. And then we also have responsibility for anytime the 350 people are together in one room, right? When there's a plenary session, that's the responsibility of the overall design team. We have a sub-team that's responsible for marketing and communications. So they're doing all the messaging, they're doing the sponsorship package, they're doing anything that's graphic or visual that's related to the summit. They are responsible for that. And then we have a sub-team that we call breakout sessions. So we know that the summit will include a series of breakout sessions, and this team is responsible for coming up with that content, organizing those sessions, training onboarding the facilitators if we need them, right? They own all of the nuts and bolts of that particular part of the summit. So those were the 3 sub-teams that we came up with.
Fantastic. All right, so let's go back up, and you want to just talk a little bit about the core team? how they ended up in the core team?
Yeah, so the core team is essentially the person who's leading each of the sub-teams. In our case, Cody is the project manager, so she's she actually sits on all of the teams. So she's just, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that, but in our case, it's working. It's what we need to do. So she's absolutely on the core team. I'm on the core team as the overall. So each of myself, Donna, and Lindsay, we all own a sub team. We all lead a sub team. And then Michelle's the logistics lead, and she doesn't really, like, we don't have a sub team for logistics, but logistics touches everything that all of the sub teams do. So that's why she's on the core team.
Cool. All right. So what was really helpful about going through this process? What's informative about the framework and how did it inform your thinking?
For me, it's really helpful, again, to see it on paper and to get organized in my mind. And then it's really useful in terms of sharing with the team and thinking about, it provides a sense, I guess, of how the work's going to get done. Starting to create this linkage between what we need to do and who's going to do it.
Yeah. And then once you went through the first pass, what did anything pop out to you that was missing in your thinking?
Yeah, so I think we're missing, as I look at this now, I think we're missing some feedback and input events specifically.
Yeah, cool. All right. Any questions or comments or thoughts from the group? Because that is the fishbowl for this section.
I want to add one that's missing, Joanne, just for the purpose of illustration.
Yeah.
So we have a feedback input event that I think is missing, but if we can add that, that would be great. And what do I want to put here? So I want to call this the quarterly executive committee meetings. So we meet with so Blue Sky, the summit is one event that's part of the programming for the work that Blue Sky does around diversity and inclusion. All of the work is guided by input from the executive committee, and we meet quarterly. We don't meet really any other time, and sometimes we communicate with them in between. So these meetings are we should be leveraging every quarterly meeting between now and the summit, and then even after the summit, to make sure we're getting feedback and input on key decision points and or their experience at the summit.
Cool. All right. Thoughts, questions, observations from the group?
Good.
All right.
Okay.
You're going to do a thing, group, in a second. All right, so we're going to move to the 120 item. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tee up, I jumped the gun a little bit before because I got so excited. I just love this part. So I'm going to do a little bit of just talking about the network, and then all of us are going to actually engage in this exercise together. Although it was very logical and linear and clear how Shannon just walked through this. Some of us can think this way and some of us can't. And so where this organizing stakeholder worksheet points us to, or what it informs us, is actually something called a stakeholder network. So go to your slide deck.
Yep. I'm not sharing my screen. Sorry. I thought, oh, am I? Am I sharing my screen? No. Okay.
Sweet. Okay. So we've already talked about Liaison, and it was so if you remember, look at the worksheet, the liaisons are all highlighted. So the connect the dots is all there. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So the stakeholder network essentially does this, and I don't know what go to the next slide.
I'm trying. Hang on.
Oh, okay. It's doing that thing where it gets stuck. I always call this Tinker Toys. It's like I don't know what the 21st century equivalent to Tinker Toys was, but when I was a kid, you always have the thing and the dowels and they connected. So this is essentially the Tinker Toys model of creating a stakeholder network. And in its core, you have at the beginning, you have what is core team? And so what we want to do is actually draw the core team sort of in the center of the universe. And we want to populate it with who is on the core team. And because the liaison becomes the really important linkages that connects us from one team to another or one team to another event, we want to highlight with a different color the people that are performing the function of the liaison. So here we started with the core team. We have 5 people on it. Roma, Elise, and Rohit, we know are already going to be liaisons, which means communication is going to be flowing in and out through their nodes. Go to the next slide. So from here, we obviously can link the different work groups or the different sub-teams. So Roma is also going to be part of sub-team 3. She has 3 other members on that team. We can see already from Roma that Amy perhaps is going to be linking to some other output or event or something that's going to come out of sub-team 3. Over on Elise, the same thing. She has 3 other members on her team, and Sam is going to link us to something, something else. And for whatever reason, we don't have people on Rohit's team. Maybe Rohit's just going to do a thing. Go to the next slide. All right. So in this case, we have Sam and Amy already identified. And in this case, what she's going to do, Amy is going to do some sort of communication event with a staff meeting, maybe a standing staff meeting. And Sam is going to receive input from perhaps some C stakeholders by running a focus group. And so already, even though we have no idea what problem they're solving, we can already begin to see how information and work is being conducted and how communication is flowing interdependently throughout this whole thing. Is there another slide? I think that's it. All right, so we are gonna, so go ahead and stop sharing the screen. So in this part of the exercise, which is step 2 of the 1120 network, what I want to invite all of you to do, and we've never done it quite this way before, but we thought we'd prototype something. Using Shannon's fishbowl organizing stakeholder sheet, I am going to stand up and actually use this ginormous whiteboard that is behind me.
You can see it. We're good. Yeah, we got a nice view.
Focus there. And begin to actually create the stakeholder network based upon what she has outlined. So what I'm going to need you guys to do is help me. So what I've done is I've created my table. Blue is going to be core team. Black is sub-team. Purple is input feedback. And orange is communication. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the core team. And I draw it and somebody calls out the stakeholders. Would somebody call out the stakeholders that are on this? Who's on the core team?
So in order to do this team, you guys need to hop on to the second fishbowl worksheet.
The organized fishbowl. And
yeah.
So take everybody.
And I'm going to try not to talk.
Okay.
Because I know exactly how this all comes together. So this is your chance to apply.
Cody.
Cody.
Shannon.
Shannon.
Donna.
Donna.
Hold on. Lindsay and Michelle.
Lindsay and Michelle. Okay, so we have our core team. Great. What happens next? What's another? Where are our next linkages? We probably want to link a sub team onto one of these. What sub team do we want to link next?
On the planning committee.
Planning committee. Who's the liaison to the planning committee?
There'll be Cody.
Cody. All right. How many people are on the planning committee so I know how big to make my circle? Is that the big one?
Mm-hmm.
It is big.
Oh yeah. I don't know if I really, okay. Let's just, all right. So we got a whole bunch of people on there, right? Are there, so I'm not going to actually, they're all listed here. Is anyone a liaison to anything else? Can we imagine that they're actually doing some other things? Not in this diagram. All right, so in this case, but in the real world, chances are one of these people is actually a liaison, right? Doing something else. So we could actually make the diagram bigger. All right. What else? What's another sub-team?
Overall design.
Overall design. Who's the anchor to that?
Shannon.
Shannon. How many people are on that design team?
5, 4.
Four people? All right, so I don't have to make it too big. And who are the people on that team other than Shannon?
Charlene, Cody, and Nicole.
Cody and Nicole. Anybody else liaisoning anything anywhere from there?
Cody.
Cody.
Well, not from.
Not from there, but Cody's doing
Not
okay. So poor
from
Cody's
there.
gonna show up. Cody's going to show up everywhere. All
Yeah.
right. What else? What's another work team we could link? I'm going to make Shannon's team a little smaller. I think I made that one too big. What's another sub team?
Marketing and communication.
Marketing comm. Okay. Let me make this. So that was Cody, Charlene. Was it Nancy?
Nicole.
Nicole. Okay. Marketing comm. Who's doing Marcom?
Cody and Lindsay. Lindsay is the liaison.
Okay. How many people are on that team?
Just one other, Cody.
Poor Cody. All right. Okay. And I remember the M lady she's logistics. So D, what's the D lady? Donna, what's Donna anchoring?
Breakout sessions.
Marcom. Right. Okay. I forgot to label these. So Marcom, Shannon's design, right? Overall design.
Yes.
And these guys are called, what are they called? Oh, planning. Planning. Okay. And Donna's doing what again? What's Donna doing?
Breakout sessions.
Oh, breakout. That's right. Breakout. She has a bunch of people on that team, doesn't she?
Well, there's 4 besides her.
Okay. Who do we have them listed?
Jason, Cody,
Jason.
Mario, and
All right.
Vitalina.
Alina with an E? Okay.
A. Well,
With a what?
it's Vitalina
With a V?
with a V.
Okay, sorry. Okay. What's another thing that we can, so we've got our sub teams. What else have we got? I think we added some input feedback events, right?
There's a communication event and 2 feedback events.
Okay, where did we put that? Is that coming out of Marcom or is this coming out of somewhere else?
Well, the communication event that we have listed is the summit itself. So it's probably coming off of the planning
Okay.
team. I mean, it's the ultimate experience.
Ultimate event.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that I don't think this was clear when I explained this, but everybody who sits on a sub team sits on the summit planning team. So that's like the Uber team. Like when all the sub teams come together, we call that the planning team.
All right. So it's not a traditional. So the summit itself, I'm just thinking it doesn't really belong. I mean, it's sort of the ultimate, right? It's the whole.
Right. It's the intent, right? When it happens, we've achieved our intent.
So it's like everything.
Yeah.
Points to there. That's not a traditional way we think about the. All right. So what other communication events do we have? Didn't we add?
We have
There's
2
2.
other.
Okay.
Yeah, 2 feedback events.
Feedback input event. So that's actually a different color. Who's doing the first feedback input event? Post summit feedback. Where would that be coming from?
Well, let me make that more specific, Joanne, and I'm going to call it survey.
Okay. Who would be responsible for that? And maybe
Says the Blue Sky team.
Blue Sky team. So where's that? Shan, where's that?
Well, it's not very clear. I think it's good. This is why this is helpful.
This is why it's And this happens, right? This happens a lot. We're like, oh yeah, we're gonna do a survey. Who's gonna do a survey? Right?
I think I would probably put that off of the overall design team, because I think the overall design team, or maybe the core team, I'm going to take it back. I'm going to say the core team has responsibility for that particular, for designing that survey.
And just for, you know, beauty, can we ask our M lady maybe to anchor the
Michelle? Sure.
Yeah. Let's have, so she does a survey, right? So post summit survey. This is really for illustrative purposes only. What's our other input feedback event that we have right now on our thing? What is this? Yeah, quarterly, blah, blah, blah. Who would anchor that? Where's the information? How's that entering into the universe here?
Well, so it's Cody and my job. We steer the executive team. I chair those meetings.
Oh, the executive team is missing in this diagram.
Yes, they are. They're a feedback input event, because that's where in our quarterly meetings we would go. We have been going to them to get input.
Oh, let's add them to our diagram. So we can't move these things around, but I'm gonna put them over here because they're sort of a executive committee. And who is the liaison from? Is it from the core team?
Yeah, well, we could decide that it could be one of two. It could be the core, or it could be the overall design. I mean, it's Cody and it's my job to liaise with the executive committee.
Actually, make that your responsibility.
Okay.
And then, oh yeah, so then these quarterly events, actually, these come out of your responsibility sitting on the core team, right? Okay. Now you can see this is a pretty simplistic diagram, because I think that's it, right, in terms of what we got. But yeah, you can see, so I'm sort of curious, Idaho team, what is this exercise, what is it illustrative of? Any thoughts or feedback? Is it all useful exercise?
So for me, if I can, I want to draw on some different experience. So I've been on this board that I mentioned earlier that has like right now 25 people on the board. And in my time, so I've been on the board for 3.5, 4 years, something like that. And we have this awful history of creating what we end up calling either a task force or a working group, and then nothing happens, because either that group never gets together, or they get together but they never report back to the full board, and then nothing ever happens, and it's all feels sort of like our version of what you just drew on the whiteboard is just like a whole bunch of separate circles that are not interconnected, and nothing happens, and everyone's just like, well, this was stupid, and why are we doing this, right? So I think seeing it, and I'm like definitely a visual learner, so for me the picture really helps to see how things are interconnected and where there's a gap that might need to be filled. So that definitely appeals to the way that my brain works. So I like that.
Right. Right. Because that's exactly right. Because in a lot of work plans, you might have the bubbles, but the bubbles have nothing to do with each other. Right.
They're just floating in space.
They're just floating in space. That's exactly right. Yeah. So this sort of forces you to think, okay, if it's important enough to make it a bubble, it's important enough for us to anchor how it actually is involved in the whole thing. Yeah.
The other thing that does is it begins to clarify roles and responsibilities and communications channels. So you don't end up with like, Valerie went and talked to the governor's office when that was actually, Steve's job as the liaison in the way that we drew the stakeholder network or whatever, right? So it helps us stay in our lane in a good way as it relates to roles and responsibilities and communication with other stakeholders.
Right. Reflections, thoughts, questions from Sam or Jason?
So I see this, and again, pulling back on my military experience, have had a lot of time in the military. So in the military, we do a thing whenever we're setting up a defensive perimeter around our base. We draw up a fire plan of that defensive perimeter. We take it and we draw it on a board. And so by drawing that defensive plan on the board, it shows us if there's any gaps. Then you can visually see, is there any gaps? Is there anything missing? Do we have something that is not covered, not protected, whatever? And while you were drawing that up on the board, it's exactly what I was thinking about. Is this looks like a fire plan. This looks like one of our fire plans because, and it seems silly to draw a picture. Okay, well, we're just drawing, it seems silly. Why are we drawing a picture here? But when you draw it out, you see, okay, did we forget something? Did we miss something? Do we not have something interconnected? And that goes back to exactly what Valerie was saying, that, the by drawing it out, you see, you fill the gaps, you plug in the holes. And so for me, it's kind of entertaining. To see that drawn up, that, oh, hey, it's not only the military that draws pictures, to plan stuff out. I think it's super helpful when it's drawn out. Oh, we missed something.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I am going to ask Jason in a second, but I want to make one point. Shannon, in drawing this out, it really helps illustrate this. Shannon said that Cody's role as project manager is intentionally by design to show up in all these different places. But I want to just sort of circle every time Cody shows up. A lot of times when it comes to strategy, having one person essentially be the human conduit through which all the information is required to flow through is actually a weak point in your strategy, right? So if it weren't the fact that this was intentionally part of her job, typically we'd say, oh my God, how is Cody, and actually we might still say that, how on earth is Cody actually going to be doing that, right? And a lot of times when we are being tasked with an execution, like I've seen this in Shannon's world too, where Shannon is like in 100 different places. And in fact, you might see Shannon show up in a diagram that we might show you. And so when it comes to strategy, when we're talking about deployment and delegation, right, a diagram like this actually allows us to ask the question, is this the best use of Cody, right? Could there be some other potential stakeholder that could perform that particular role and responsibility? So we and the military is really good at this, separating the role and responsibility from the person, right? The office from the person. So Jason, any thoughts, questions, reflections, observations, musings from you?
I was in the Air Force, so we didn't draw much of anything. Just thought about the most direct route to the chow hall. But I do have to say, just like Valerie said, I'm a visual learner, and the information putting it up on the board just with simple circles, people's names, it really drove home, what was on the document in a more linear fashion.
Awesome, great. All right, let's go ahead and just do step 3. Shan, will you do the last 2 slides?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Let me, I got to share my screen again.
I should start with 42.
Okay, so these are our...
It's just the diagram and then the takeaway.
Final thoughts on stakeholders. So a couple things about a stakeholder map, and then I'll talk to you specifically about this particular stakeholder map. This is reiterating really, I think, a lot of what you've just said, but it's a visual representation of our system of stakeholders. And it shows how we're organized, and it also shows how the parts of the system relate to one another. So the map, this picture, a picture like this, allows us to better see and understand our system of stakeholders. And when we're thinking about our self-other system framework, and we're thinking about change, we're unable to engage the system productively until we can see the system. So this is a way for us to see the system. And when we do that, it allows, a visible map allows any stakeholder to see the system. They can see themselves in the system. They can see others in the system, and then they can see their relationship between themselves and others. So it makes oftentimes what's invisible in terms of how we're coming together and our relationship with each other and our relationship with the system that we're trying to change, it makes that visible. And it's that visibility that gives us everything that you guys just described in terms of seeing the gaps, seeing the missing connections, and figuring out how to knit all of that together. So this particular picture is from a real example at my former work that I led at Micron. The intent of our work was to define and introduce the core values as an anchor for company culture. This work took 18 months from start to finish, and this stakeholder map touched every person, so all 34,000 people in the company. And 1,000 of these stakeholders were actively involved in feedback and input events. And then every employee was actually involved in a workshop, which is represented by this, use my cursor, this bubble here, this global workshop experience, to have an experience with the core values. It was across 17 different countries. All of the work that we did was translated into 4 different languages. We had a probably 12 to 10 person core team. But the ability to engage this many people was really essential to the effectiveness of this particular change, particularly our ability to say to our C stakeholders, our employees, that their input was absolutely considered and that they were actively involved in the process. But it would not have been possible to effectively engage this many people without all of the building blocks that we've talked about up until this point. So how to design meetings, because all of the skills that you use in meetings are the same way that you design an effective feedback and input event. Scoping this problem from the very beginning, and then thinking about how we engage our stakeholders so thoroughly from around the company.
Yeah.
This is the slide that got me totally excited when I was talking to Valerie and Steve about this initially. I absolutely love being able to think about how to engage people at this depth for a change of this scope and this nature.
Before you go to that, I just want to make one more comment about this diagram. Even though it does have particular individuals, it doesn't have obviously all 35,000 people. But one of the really awesome things about a map like this is, let's just say one of the off of the blue circle, there's up on the 11 o'clock position, there's like a process core team. Mm-hmm. So let's imagine that, like, say Faye had to drop out of the team and you had to substitute Sam in there. A lot of times when a new person joins a large change effort in midstream, it's very disorienting and you don't know what's going on and so all you sort of have is sort of your myopic view. A stakeholder map like this, so say Faye had to swap out and Steve had to step in, you could easily say, okay, now you're this dot in this diagram, and very quickly be able to onboard and orient a team, like almost not quite instantaneously, but as fast and instantaneous as you can, with a fairly high level of fidelity. Mm-hmm. And Shannon, I imagine that may have happened sometime in the 18 months that you were, there must have been somebody who like had
yeah,
this.
we actually, where's the, do I have the team in here? I can't immediately find the team, but we did end up needing to make a change with one of our leads.
Yeah.
And this made it easier to orient the new person, who was also new to the company, right? So we had sort of multiple layers of newness for him. So this structure quickly gave him a sense of who we were engaging and how.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, our next slide. So last couple of thoughts about stakeholders. So we didn't talk a lot about this, but it is also important when we think about our self-other-system framework. Remembering that leadership starts with self is remembering who you are as a stakeholder. So like in the stakeholder work that we just did, Valerie, you did remember, right? You thought of yourself, right? Purchasing manager, I am a stakeholder. So being mindful and conscious of our relationship to the change and who we are as a stakeholder is really important. Knowing who our stakeholders are is the core of all complex problem solving. So as Joanne kind of introduced this whole topic, people are messy, people's motivations and hearts and minds are messy, and until we really begin to develop the skills around involving them in change, it's difficult to solve complex problems, particularly in the world today, because all of our complex problems involve many different stakeholders. Being open to and including others is really, to me, the heart of change leadership. It's not about being a person in power or being a part of a small group of hierarchical leaders and deciding what's best for everybody else. Change leadership is about this an open-heartedness and a desire to include others and to approach them with the attitude of what do they care about and what can they contribute. It's much more generative and enrolling. And ultimately, it's the fuel for creating sustainable change. If we want to create the changes that we seek, we have to include the people who are a part of that change to make that possible. And then the final thing is, just like with scope and just like with meetings, although we teach this in a linear fashion, it is evolving and iterative. So the stakeholder map itself is organic. You can build it to a certain point as you're starting your change effort, and then it will grow and evolve as you identify new stakeholders or you develop new and different ways of engaging the stakeholders that you've identified. And with that, we are complete. Thoughts or questions about our final thoughts on stakeholders or stakeholder maps? Hearing none? Okay. All right. So let's talk about next steps, you guys. So we have a working session coming up. I think it's week after next. We have 3 hours, and it's really, at this point, it's unscripted and open time. So that it can look a couple of different ways. It could look like the meetings working session where everybody brought something, a meeting that you were working on individually that you wanted to upgrade your meeting plan. I could imagine each of you bringing an initiative that you're working on that you would like to take a look at from the lens of PIC and begin to think about maybe how to differently engage your stakeholders or draw your stakeholder map for that particular initiative. Each of you could be working independently or in pairs, and I can provide coaching. We'll have to see, I guess, Valerie, if we're in, like if that's going to be in person or we're going to be doing that on Zoom again. The other option, which I am not sure if it would be as useful to the team, is to take the Medicaid example and begin to move that forward, or take something else that the team is working on that like that's already maybe been blessed as an initiative, and begin to help build the stakeholder inventory and the network for that. So I'm looking for the 3 of you and on behalf of Chelsea to let me know what you think would be the best and most valuable use of our time.
One idea that I was thinking about while we were going through this was the calendar year 20 initiatives for purchasing. And I don't know if there is a stakeholder map, and if there's, I know we have different roles that have already been established in the initiatives, but I don't know if it's actually been completely mapped out and laid out as far as all the stakeholders on the initiatives and a map with the liaisons and showing that. So that was one idea that I was thinking of, was using our CY20 initiatives and actually mapping it out.
I had the same exact thought, actually, Sam. I was sort of picturing if we took because we have this whole list of initiatives, we have it separated into 4 like categories. And I could definitely see it lending itself to mapping and sort of finding the gaps and
do each of those, so we would probably want to take that initiative by initiative, right? And do each of you own, or are you sponsors of an initiative?
So Chelsea, Jason, Steve, and I are each a sponsor. And everybody but me is also an owner of one of the initiatives. And I think I'm an owner now if I actually get Steve's thumbs up on that, because Danny had an initiative that he was the owner of, and now that he has left the team, I may step in as the owner of that one. So we could potentially map out each of us one that we're the owner for.
Okay. And Sam, how about, do you have something in that plan too that you're taking responsibility for?
So yeah, federal surplus, we have initiatives we have CY20 initiatives. Us being a smaller group, just a team of 4 of us at the federal surplus there, our initiatives weren't broke out into separate teams, but those initiatives definitely do have stakeholders. You know, I mean, we didn't, our initiatives just weren't broke out into smaller groupings because there's only 4 of us there. So, but there's definitely stakeholders in our initiatives, absolutely.
That you could map?
Yep.
What are your thoughts, Jason? How does that sound to you in terms of taking, each of you bringing an initiative that you're responsible for? I would want to craft some pre-work around using the worksheets to identify your stakeholders. And then the working session would probably be an opportunity for you to maybe partner up and build your networks, like support each other one way, and then we would do some sharing and cross-learning as a full group.
Yeah, I like the idea. I'm sitting here thinking about an initiative that I own, and you know, something we learned in the last few months is how much it intermingles with other people's initiatives, and perhaps you know, mapping it out. What I think it would definitely help me get my brain around it.
Cool. Okay. So let's, Valerie, could I ask you to take the lead with the team to make sure that everybody is clear on which one they're going to bring?
Yeah.
And I'll build. And so just to make sure I'm clear as I'm thinking about design, each of you will bring a separate one. Is that correct? Okay. I'm going to do this in 2 steps. I'm going to get the pre-workout sooner rather than later. So it's before I actually probably have time to build the full design. But I think that'll give you guys more time to do your pre-work. And then the design will work to support that. So I'll send the pre-workout. You guys already have it all, but I'll make it clear in an email and send it out. I'll do that by Friday of this week, because that gives you at least a full week, if not longer, to have that done before our session. Anything else that feels like we would need to clarify to make sure that that's the best use of our working session? Okay, it sounds great to me. I want to point out one more template before we check out. So on this link here, so there's a couple of different ways. Let me back up to say there's a couple of different ways to do your stakeholder network. There's what Joanne just modeled for us, which is drawing on the whiteboard, which tends to be, if you're like working by yourself or you have a whiteboard available, tends to work really well. You can also use stickies, like put every stakeholder's names on stickies and then move them around the circles to sort that out. Joanne's done it with pipe cleaners and other like more sort of real tactile stuff in a workshop, which can be kind of fun and enjoyable for a team. And then you can use your computer. So this link takes you to a Google slide template. I won't open it, but you all have access to it, and it has essentially an online version that's already ready to go with bubbles and names and liaisons, and you can begin, and that's what we'll probably use in our session together for you to begin to build your stakeholder networks. Okay, anything else in terms of next steps or thoughts or questions before we check out? We're promptly on time at 11:50. Okay, all right, let us check out. So our checkout question for today, and we'll start with silent reflection, is what's one thing you've learned today that emboldens you to engage your stakeholders? I'll give you a second to think about that, and then we'll check out. All right, who would like to start?
Well, I think one of the most useful things that I got today and easiest to remember is the care and contribute concept. Just thinking about the word care helps me to, broaden my thinking about who needs to be involved in, a problem-solving project or something to that effect. And I think what was covered today makes it clear that, especially lining it out, using PIC, it makes it clear that everyone that is identified as a stakeholder will have something to contribute in some sort of fashion. So that's really the biggest thing that I think I can take away. I like simple things, and to me that's a simple thing.
Cool, that's great, Jason. Thank you very much. Valerie or Sam?
So it's funny because I was thinking along the same lines of what Jason just said. As we were going through this, when looking at the care and contribution columns, as we were doing Medicaid, I was thinking to myself, who cares? Okay, so does this person care? And if I say to myself they don't care, then they're not gonna have anything to contribute. If I say to myself they don't care, so it means it doesn't affect them. You know what I mean? If Medicaid in no way affects this person, they don't care. So they're not gonna have anything to contribute. If this person says, if I say to myself, yeah, they probably care, well, then I need to look at them because they probably have something to contribute. There's probably something that they either have to contribute or they need to be informed of it. If I say to myself, they care, they don't care, they care, they don't care, I kept running that phrase through my mind as we were thinking of the stakeholders. And so I like that. That's something I hadn't thought about before, was when thinking of those people, who cares? Oh, okay, well, they care. So that means they must have some part in it, some piece of it. If I say to myself, they care.
Mm-hmm.
So.
That's great, Sam. Thank you. Valerie?
So one of the things that jumped out to me that I guess was sort of a newer, something I hadn't really thought about much before, was kind of matching up the the intended outcomes, the 6 categories of intended outcomes, with the type of stakeholder. So kind of, it's not one size fits all, right? So it's not approaching every type of stakeholder in the same way. It's being a little more thoughtful in how to engage with a particular type of stakeholder, to sort of both for the benefit of the stakeholder, giving them what they really want and need in this whole equation, and also for the benefit of whatever the project or the change is, that you're sort of engaging them in a way that's going to be most beneficial to the big picture.
Mm-hmm.
So that's definitely something that I think I'll want to noodle on a little more.
Mm-hmm. Cool, great. Joanne, I'll let you check out, and then I'll say what I was going to say.
Great. So I'm also in the care and contribute space. So I want to dovetail off of what Jason and Sam talked about. I think I rather cheekily said, well, I always start with the contribute piece, and you were saying I always start with the care piece. And so what the thing that I'm reflecting on is really going to the care piece, more intentionally rather than just thinking about what they can contribute. Because a lot of times stakeholders, we need them to contribute something. And if we identify that they don't care initially, it doesn't mean we throw them away necessarily, but that it is incumbent upon us to build that breadcrumb trail to try to figure out what is the best way to enroll them to care enough, right? So, but just doing that, thinking about what they care about, saying, oh, they care about this, I care about this. Like the strategy comes in with how do you actually bring those two things together? And if you don't have that initial framework, there's a lot of frustration that potentially gets built in because you're like, I need them to care, but they just can't, right? So to just do that thinking in advance, go, oh, well, they care about this. Maybe I can help them see how what they care about is connected to my thing. So that's
cool.
I'm just all geeked out about that.
Oh, cool. Thank you. I want to check out by saying a couple things. The first is that what I hear in each of your checkouts is a mindset shift around stakeholders, right? And if of all the things that we've learned, I think that's the most empowering thing, is to really begin to shift to a generative place of thinking about how they can contribute and how we can enroll them. Because regardless of whether or not you use PIC or build a stakeholder diagram, if you start approaching people with a different mindset, they will respond differently and therefore contribute to your change differently. So I'm super encouraged to hear that. And then the second thing for me is around, I'm reminded of the power of the map, right? And that when we make our relationships to one another explicit and visible, it allows us to come together in a much more impactful way. I also want to thank Joanne for joining us. I'm really appreciative, JC, of your willingness to be here for the last two sessions. It's been a nice benefit of quarantine and Zoom. So thank you for spending time with us. And knowing that this is our last session, I want to make sure to say that to you here in front of the team. So thank you. And with that, you guys, thank you so much. We are complete. I will work with the Strelo videographer, otherwise known as Shannon's 16-year-old, to post our video right away so that Chelsea and Steve have access to it should they choose to listen to it. So I'll let you know when that's available. And otherwise, I'll be in touch about our working session, and I look forward to it. Okay.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Joanne.
Jenny.
Okay.
Thanks,
Bye,
Joanne.
everybody. Nice
Thank
seeing
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye.